Hi everyone, Greg Capitolo here with the Himalayan Institute, here to talk about self-study. And what does self-study really mean in the context of yoga? You know, many of us are drawn to yoga for very, very different reasons. It might be the case that some of us go to a local yoga class because we have a sore low back or a tight left hip, and a friend or colleague had mentioned yoga might help. Others, we can experience extreme amounts of stress in our lives and we can't quite get a handle on it. And a friend or colleague says, hey, check out yoga, go to a yoga class. They have great relaxations. And still others health might be just fine, and we're curious about the practice of meditation, what that might do for us and how we might be able to calm sometimes our distracted minds and learn to cultivate a more peaceful, joyful mind, and many, many other reasons that we approach or take up a yoga practice. If we stick with it long enough, and we're lucky enough, chances are good that we'll start to get exposed to certain yogic texts like the Yoga Sutra, the Bhagavad Gita, some of the Upanishads, and we'll begin to hear this concept or idea called self-study, and intrigue will and a natural even interest or enthusiasm in us will want to know, what exactly does that mean, and how do I approach self-study from a yogic perspective? So I wanted to talk to you a little bit how to sort of demystify that approach, what self-study is, and from where the term really comes in yoga. So specifically, it comes from the Yoga Sutra. It's one of the niyamas or observances you might be familiar with the 8 rungs of yoga, Ashtanga yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga. The second limb are the niyamas, and one of those niyamas or observances is self-study. The Sanskrit for that is Svadhyaya. And the Sanskrit term itself will give us a hint at what this idea, or practice, I should say, of self-study really is. Swa, the first part, is oneself, or really the power of oneself. And adhyaya is to study, to examine, or contemplate. So the term svadhyaya, and remember it's an observance, so it's a call to action, it's something that we want to do, is to study, examine ourselves in an active way, and see some of the inherent self-luminous qualities of our minds, as well as some of the acquired limitations, we say. Some of those aspects of our minds we wish to transform. Because ultimately, once we get a taste of yoga practice, for whatever that initial reason was, for some low back pain or for some tight left hip or whatever the case may be, it's super intriguing and we're super enthused that there's more to yoga, that there is this aspect of working with our minds. And so this idea of svadhyaya, or self-study, becomes a very active, or can become a very active part of yoga. So how do we practice this? What does the scripture, the sacred text, the Yoga Sutra say we should do to practice svadhyaya, or self-study? Well, traditionally there's two aspects. One is meditation itself, or mantra japa, repeating the sound of a mantra, resting the mind in a mantra, or resting the mind in that peaceful flow of inward awareness. Giving that aspect of our minds that you and I are so used to, that aspects of our minds that easily, by their design, jump from one thought to the next, because they have to, and our minds have to work that way in order to live our lives. But when in overdrive, we become easily distracted. When the senses are all consuming, our minds are just so engaged with everything we see, hear, taste, touch. meditation gives us a chance to rest that aspect of our minds, and therefore see more deeply, examine, as we said earlier, more deeply, deeper, more subtle aspects of our minds that are the impetus or the causes for, or motivations for doing things that we know aren't the best things for us to do, but also enable us to see deeper, more subtle aspects of our minds which are virtuous and what we want to cultivate to undertake different ways of living our lives, different ways of practicing yoga in positive ways. So meditation, stilling the mind, as one aspect of Svadhyaya, enables us to do that, to see both our mind's limitations and our mind's inherent luminosity. The second aspect, traditionally, that's prescribed for a Svadhyaya, a self-study practice, is the study of sacred text, Shastra, or Moksha Shastra. Texts written by sages who've tread the path before us, who've had the experience of experiencing their self-luminous minds, and therefore want nothing more than to share that experience with you and I, so that we can learn, so that we too can have as an experience resting our minds in that inherent self-luminous quality that we all have. So what are some of those shastras or yogic texts, source wisdom texts? Well, we've mentioned one already, the Yoga Sutra itself, from where the term Svadhyaya comes as one of the niyamas. The Bhagavad Gita is a wonderful text. The Yoga Vasishta, the Upanishads, or many tantric texts. What makes the study of these texts especially helpful for us as a form of self-study is, as I mentioned before, in that first step or first aspect of self-study, as we're stilling our minds, meditating, we see sometimes the either not so pleasant things of our minds that we were ignoring or just maybe not aware of. And because we see that, and because we have that experience, we also wish to transform that. And so we see a vision of ourselves that's different. We see a vision of ourselves that we evolve, we grow, we mature, we become, we cultivate a more still, calm, tranquil mind. And that might require a change in lifestyle. It could be a very significant change. And so we look to these yogic texts for inspiration, and specifically in those times where we might face a big life decision. And why do those texts help? Because often in yogic texts, the source wisdom, we have a dialogue between a teacher and a student. The Bhagavad Gita is a great example. The dialogue between Krishna, the embodiment of God, and Arjuna, who is you and I, the aspirant who feels a little bit despondent or discouraged. By reading the text, the yogic texts such as the Bhagavad Gita, we see ourselves in those texts, and we are inspired by those stories, especially in those times where we need that inspiration, where from the process of meditation, from self-contemplation, from really examining the motivations in our lives and our thoughts, speech, and actions very carefully, and wish to change, and come up against resistance, as we all do when we try to change. The reading of the sacred texts, as I mentioned, just can be such a wonderful way to provide solace to us, and support and inspiration Because at the end of the day, remember, Svadhyaya, an observance, one of the niyamas, is a call to action. It's an active force. It's part of Kriya Yoga, which we talk about in another talk on HI Online. There's a very powerful force that underlies the practice of Svadhyaya. So when you hear self-study, or when you hear the self, and it's commonly used, and you'll hear it a lot as you mature or just attend more yoga classes or start to take seminars, a good way to ground yourself in what self-study is to refer to the Yoga Sutra, in particular Sutra 2.1, the first sutra of the second chapter, where this practice of self-study, Svadhyaya, is defined. And the two aspects that we've talked about today, meditation, calming, stilling the mind, and reading, contemplating the source wisdom text, give us the opportunity to really, quote, see ourselves, all the great, wonderful aspects of ourselves that we wish to continue and nurture, and all those not so great or not so wonderful aspects of ourselves, which we all have, and gain the inspiration or obtain the inspiration that we need to transform those aspects of ourselves. So that is self-study in a nutshell. And I invite you to peruse HI Online for more talks, more lectures, even a formal digital course on the Yoga Sutra, to really see, explore this idea of self-study, Svadhyaya, in context to the rest of the text of the Yoga Sutra. So with that, I thank you, and I look forward to being with you again soon.